Jacques-Fred Petrus was the brainchild behind Change's debut album The Glow of Love, featuring Luther Vandross. Vandross was also featured on the backing vocal on the song A Lover's Holiday. As a teen, Petrus worked in a French nightclub where he mingled with billionaire Ari Onassis, Frank Sinatra, and Ava Gardner. He later worked as a shop assistant at the Fiorucci fashion store. From there, a wealthy benefactor helped him launch a record store. He would later become a successful music producer. From borrowing money to firing people on the spot or ignoring them completely, Petrus ruled with erratic discipline, treating musicians and professionals who were integral to his company as if they were nobodies. He made a lot of enemies. Petrus' links to the mafia stretched back to his time in Milan. Initially, it was supposed he actually performed work for the mob, possibly in the shape of money laundering. After he became famous, he traveled the jet-set circuit and enjoyed residing in oceanfront villas. He also spoke Italian, French, English, and Spanish. In the early hours of a morning most probably still thick with tropical heat, Jacques-Fred Petrus was shot several times in the head at his villa in Guadalupe. While information and sources are limited, and even the identity of the gunman remains a relative mystery, it is presumed that the murderer was a contract killer who emerged in scuba diving gear from the ocean surrounding Petrus' villa. Carole de Passalane was an exceptional young lady. She was a former model who took over commentator duties for the Ebony Fashion Fair, and she was a United Airlines flight attendant, and she performed as Carol Denmark at the Playboy Club in Chicago. In the 1960s, de Passalane traveled the world. She also had famous friends and was well liked, but then she was murdered, strangled and stabbed in the face 20 times. Her husband, Herbert Kamen, was acquitted of murder charges, but Judge Thomas Maloney did say that Kamen was a schemer, crooked, ignorant, and callous, and circumstances cast a dark cloud of suspicion over him. But the evidence didn't add up to proof beyond a reasonable doubt, even though Kamen had taken out a $250,000 life insurance policy on her. Evidence of Kamen's homosexuality was introduced at his first trial, but Maloney ruled it irrelevant during the retrial. Prosecutors contend that Kamen lived with a male roommate for 5 years and moved back right after his wife's death. Dwayne Lett founded DL Chill Spot, an adult site that featured black gay performers. According to author William Jervis, Lett had been banned from a gay club where he was trying to sell X-rated DVDs without asking permission. That same night, he tried to lure the youngest and weakest men into adult film. Lett also lured boys to his apartment with the promise of females. When the boys arrived, asking where are the women, he would flash money and talk them into dry humping and slowly manipulate them to go all the way. The further they would go, the more money he paid. Lett worked as an orderly at a hospital during the day. Allegedly, a woman saw the father of her child in one Lett video, and neighborhood drag queens exposed another Lett performer to his mother. Lett made a lot of enemies along the way and was murdered execution style with a silenced weapon as he shoveled snow out of his driveway. It's assumed a hired killer murdered him. Later, authorities would find audition tapes where young men screamed in pain, begging for the older men to stop. Lett had no sympathy and admonished the boys. Lett operated like a pimp. After his death, his site continued to sell memberships for $19.95 per month. Where was the money going? In the 1970s, Sterling Hobbs authored a book depicting a lethal black assassin who was allegedly consulted to murder Elijah Muhammad. This man was of superior intelligence and had a front job as a music critic / celebrity profiler, though phone interviews only. He wasn't paid for his work because he didn't need the money due to his wet work or assassination duties. In the 1970s, he was allegedly paid $75,000 per hit, the equivalent of $300,000 in today's dollars. He went by the name of Pisces, real name unknown. He was never photographed and lived in the shadows. For one assignment, he dressed in drag to get close to the target. The hit went off without a hitch. In real life, he declined the alleged contract on Elijah Muhammad because he admired the man. Yet Sterling Hobbs exposed the plot in his book, though he labeled it as fiction as a security precaution. When the book, Black Angels, was released, it allegedly created outrage in the black Muslim community because according to the book, unlike real life, Pisces followed through with the assassination. Hobbs audaciously implied that the assassination was an inside job perpetrated by the Black Angels. Shortly afterwards, Hobbs was arrested and put on death row over an alleged trumped-up murder charge. He was jailed for killing a man during an armored car heist that he swears he didn't commit. Sterling Hobbs legally changed his name to Amir Fatir in prison. In 1991, Amir received a pardon recommendation that, because of politics, was illegally revoked. He hasn't been physically free since the Ford administration. Cynthia Boron was a one-time showgirl. Cary Grant had been introduced to Cynthia Boron by friends in Los Angeles in 1969. He had taken her out on a couple of evenings, then brought her back to his Benedict Canyon house to spend the night. Although Cary admitted that there had been some sexual contact, he claimed that they had never had intercourse. Boron gave birth to a baby girl on March 12, 1970, who she named Stephanie Andrea Grant. Shortly after this, Cynthia drove up to Cary Grant's house with her newborn child. Cary refused to see her, so she remained parked outside the house throughout the night, sometimes shouting at the supposedly sleeping household and rattling the gates. Shortly after the 1970 Oscar ceremony, at which Cary received a special Oscar, a date was set for the court hearing, and Cary had to undergo both blood and sperm count tests. Boron failed to turn up for her test, and another date was set. When Grant ran into Boron with the baby, he demanded she unwrap the blankets. When the baby was unwrapped from its many layers of clothing, it turned out to be biracial. The father was allegedly a very famous black man who was never identified publicly. The paternity case was dropped as soon as it reached court. In 1973, Cynthia Boron was found bludgeoned to death in her car in a San Fernando Valley park. The murderer was never found. Tony Hester was to the Dramatics what Smokey Robinson was to the Temptations. He was so successful, allegedly, Barbra Streisand's rep wanted him to produce tracks in the late 70s. Tony Hester was a premier songwriter and producer. He wrote and produced every major hit for the Dramatics with the exception of Be My Girl. He also produced hits for the Dells. Unfortunately, Hester developed an unshakable drug addiction. Sadly, in 1980, Hester, 34, was found murdered behind a building in an alley on Detroit's east side. He was shot execution style in the front of the head. His case remains unsolved. After Hester died, the Dramatics became less successful. Myra Waters was an actress who appeared in The Learning Tree, The Greatest, and The $6 Million Man, but she was better known for her parties and star-studded card games. Sammy Davis Jr. and Lucille Ball were regulars along with numerous others. In regards to Black Hollywood, she was the queen, with a variety of connections on the West and East Coast. One of her good friends was JoJo Tynes. JoJo Tynes worked with a number of musicians and musical groups as a stage manager, including Teddy Pendergrass, the OJs, and the 3 Degrees, traveling around the country and overseas. JoJo got the shock of his life in April 1977 when a woman was shot to death in front of him. He had driven the woman, Tasmaya Taz Lang, Teddy Pendergrass's manager and girlfriend, to her home in Mount Airy the night of April 14th. JoJo was getting something out of the car trunk, and Taz was taking out her house keys when someone who had been hiding in the bushes shot her. The bullet killed her instantly. The crime was never solved. Taz Lang was also the sister of Myra Waters, pictured here with Taz and Teddy Pendergrass. The year of Taz's death, Myra Waters appeared in her last movie. It's as if she dropped off the face of the earth, never to be heard from again, and very little is available about her on Google. She simply disappeared. The closest thing to Taz Lang in this era is the portrayal of sports manager Charlie Bordelon on Queen Sugar. Like Charlie, she was shrewd and feared and a whiz with numbers, and she had worldwide connections and power. Taz also lived the good life and liked to shop on Rodeo Drive when she was in Hollywood, and she liked to attend polo matches. Nancy Wilson and Lola Falana sung at her funeral. Her death remains a mystery. Little Willie John was the #1 R&B singer in the 50s and 60s. His signature hit was Fever. On October 16th and 17th, 1964, Seattle's Magic Inn nightclub hosted the Little Willie John Show. Willie John was known for his short temper and propensity to abuse alcohol, and he was dropped by his record company in 1963. In 1966, he was convicted of manslaughter and sent to Washington State Penitentiary for a fatal knifing incident following a show in Seattle. He appealed his conviction and was released while the case was reconsidered. When he was returned to prison, John died in 1968 at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, Washington. Despite counterclaims by the likes of Rolling Stone that his death occurred after John checked into the prison hospital with pneumonia, the official cause of death was listed in his death certificate as a heart attack. But many of his peers still hold on to the belief that he was murdered because he never backed down and was being humiliated on a daily basis because of his celebrity.